We're going to Celtic this time. Number 14 is Greg Taylor. Stefan, I'll let you start with Greg Taylor. Obviously very impressive at Kilmarnock last season, got his move to Celtic. It was kind of a while before he actually featured, but he's obviously made it quite high up in this list. Why is he at number 14 for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I've always kind of been a big fan of Greg Taylor for at least the last 2 or 3 seasons, and I think he just kind of stands out as, I guess a player that, I mean, obviously coming off the back of Hickey, he's also a wee bit older, but he's not actually that old if you think about it. He's only 22. And I think the most impressive thing is that at that age he's already played about 120, 130 Premiership games in his career, and he just strikes me as a very solid player who's managed to get in that first team somewhere at a very early age, and he's proved himself as a very reliable and very exciting Premiership talent. The most interesting thing for me about Greg Taylor is that he's kind of always had this kind of comparison to other left backs for Scotland, obviously, since he's kind of came through at Kilmarnock and on his rise, and not just in terms of like Andrew Robertson at Liverpool, but obviously most particularly perhaps at Kieran Tierney, because as the kind of rumours towards him leaving for Arsenal began to gather momentum, the idea of Greg Taylor being his replacement kind of grew louder and louder as well, and I think that was a testament to just how well he was regarded at Kilmarnock at the time. Celtic obviously agreed and they picked him up in a kind of last minute deal in the transfer deadline day. Although on paper you'd think that would be a great move for him, and I think it will ultimately end up being a very good move for him, it did seem to really get in the way of his progress this season. From the outside it looked like a bizarre move because Celtic had already signed a left back that year. Taylor was kind of brought in at the last minute, and for at least a month or two it just seemed as though Celtic, or maybe particularly Neil Lennon, just didn't really have much space for him. I remember going to press conferences and he said, he just isn't up to scratch yet, he needs to get his fitness back and he maybe has to settle in. And to be honest with you, when I look at the stats I can maybe understand that, because although Taylor, I think one of the kind of misconceptions about Taylor at Kilmarnock was that he was kind of a Kieran Tierney in Ayrshire sort of thing, when in actual truth I thought his real talents at Kilmarnock lied in the fact that he was actually a very solid defender, and Steve Clarke was able to rely upon him, not because he could get up the pitch and counter-attack fully, but because he was actually very good at just kind of keeping that left flank pinned down. So I think one of the things that had to be taken into consideration when he moved to Celtic this season was that he basically had to flip from being a very solid defensive left back to being at times almost a full attacking wing back. And if you kind of look at his stats, that kind of bears out. I'll just kind of offer some, but for example, last season he was getting 0.8 touches in the box per game for Kilmarnock. This season he's getting 3.08, so that's literally more than 3 times as much. His assists per 90 have tripled. His shot assists, which means, a pass that leads to a shot, have gone from 0.4 a game to 1.34 a game. And his crossing, he's basically attempting 5 times as many crosses per game for Celtic this season. And his accuracy in terms of crosses has only dropped slightly from about 41% to about 35 or 36%. So I think he deserves a lot of credit from basically having to transition very quickly into that team. And I know a lot of people were sitting there thinking like, oh, blah, 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 he plays for Celtic, it can't be that hard. And I understand that to an extent, but I think that might be one thing if you're a striker or a winger and you're going to get in perfect service. But if you're a fullback at Celtic, you really have to get up and down that wing, and you really have to be the guy offering service on either wing. And I think he's transitioned really well. And, at 22, he's got his whole career ahead of him. And I think you're basically looking here at a fullback who already proved he's a solid defender, but now at Celtic he's kind of adding to that game in terms of what he can do in an attacking sense as well.
Yeah, I think there's 2 players in my mind that really benefited from Celtic changing to 3-5-2. One was Lee Griffiths, obviously coming back in, and it really suited him, and actually Edward as well, make that 3. But I think Greg Taylor as well ended up getting a really good run in that team and kind of just replaced Johnny Hayes, and essentially playing left midfield more than left back, and has proved himself to be reliable. He's even chipped in with some, as you say, some plenty of assists, and he's looked good. And obviously that was a run where they were unbeaten as well. That every game he's played at left mid they've not lost. So he's looked really, really decent. James, is there anything like to add to kind of the points Stefan was making about him improving in the kind of final third of his game?
No, yeah, definitely. I agree that I think fundamentally, defensively, he was always, very solid, very good. Even at Kelly going forward, I mean, you mentioned his crossing accuracy, and like that was relatively high for a fullback in the Premiership. So it's always stuff where he's always showed promise in these attacking scenarios, but obviously because of Clark's system, you don't get the same sort of creative license to roam forward. I think though since the switch to the five at the back as well, like you say, Neil, that's really helped him out because he's picked up 4 assists since playing in that sort of wing back role, whereas before it was, I think he'd only managed a couple for Celtic, so it is bearing fruit. I think one of the things that really interested me was that when you look at his passes into the final third, he's hitting the exact same amount as he was at Kilmarnock last season, but they've gotten far more accurate. Like last year, his accuracy in these kind of passes was about 55%. Now it's up to about 69%. Now, part of that is also because if you're at Celtic, you've got more players to aim for in the final third because they're a more attacking team. But I think it's indicative of just a wider trend where we see his attacking stats are improving and improving dramatically. His progressive runs have more than doubled. He's attempting a lot more dribbles. He's doing that. Those have also risen by about 8 or 9% in terms of the success rate. And like Stefan was alluding to as well, his assists and his expected assists have both like about tripled. And I think that all this points to just a player who's evolving under Lennon. I mean, he's playing a different role, but he seems to be taking to it. And I think that now he's even probably ousted Bolingoli from the team, even though I think when you look at the two players, obviously Bolingoli's seen as the sort of the attacking fullback and Taylor's seen as the defensive one. But I think Bolingoli's not. I think he's sort of flattered to deceive. I'm not entirely convinced by him at this point in time. But I think Taylor's come in and now shown that both defensively and even in an offensive role in an offensive system, he might actually be the more player that's better suited to Neil Lennon's side.
I was just about to put that to Stefan. Would you agree with what James just said about him maybe being ahead of Bolingoli or even like a Hayes in that position now? Is he first choice?
I think he is. I find it really interesting. I still see a lot of Celtic fans on Twitter who do prefer Bolingoli, and I can kind of understand that. He was the kind of international signing. He is. I mean, I'm pretty sure he's actually started off his career as a winger. So he's more of a winger converted to a kind of fullback, and at times he can kind of show the kind of pace and kind of thrill going forward that I can understand why people who go to Celtic Park every week would kind of appreciate that when they're kind of trying to batter a team with 10 men behind the ball. But I think in the long term, Greg Taylor offers far more for Celtic. I think he's got far more strings to his bow. As we've kind of alluded to, I think he's a much, much better defender than Bolingoli, even like particularly in Europe where Celtic really need to be on their game. I think Taylor's a much safer pair of hands. And as we've just kind of alluded to, he is kind of growing into that kind of role as a fullback, attacking fullback. I think as well, like just unfortunately, just before the kind of season came to an untimely end there, he really began to look like the kind of fullback that Tierney was at Celtic. You could tell he was slowly but surely getting into the rhythm of things, playing 1-2s with Ryan Christie and things like that. And he looked like a player who was really beginning to sync up with the midfielders and the kind of attacking players like Kieran Tierney once did for Celtic. And I mean, to me, that's just, I mean, I can understand why Johnny Hayes kind of gets a lot of praise because as condescending as this sounds, he's a hard worker. He gets stuck in. The kind of weird thing about Hayes for me is that since he's moved to fullback, he's kind of struck me as a player who's kind of lost his ability to cross the ball and pick out balls in the final third. Like of the three of them, Hayes I think actually probably has the most blunt approach to getting the ball in the box, which is baffling because if you consider his time at Aberdeen, he was probably one of the Premiership's most productive wingers for a number of seasons, but he's kind of reverted back into this kind of one-trick pony as a fullback for Celtic. So I totally agree with James. I think in the long term, although I think some Celtic fans may still prefer Bolingoli, I think on paper and in the future, I think Taylor's a much better prospect going forward.